that doesn't know me, Sally Hunter. I'm the comms officer at the Diversity Forum. For today's event, we are delighted to welcome Bayo Adelajo from Do It Now and Dilys Winterkorn, Project Director at the Pathway Fund. So the cost of living crisis is obviously an issue that is currently being discussed at all levels, and it's a real pressing issue for many communities within the UK and a very important discussion piece for our sector. Bayo and Dilys will be discussing the results from a recent online survey exploring the impact of the cost of living crisis, and they will be looking to explore some of the challenges that Black CSEs face, the implications for their sustainability and impact, as well as advocate for solutions to mitigate the adverse effects of the cost of living crisis on Black CSEs. So on that note, I will hand over to Bayo and Dilys, and thank you once again for being with us today.
Thank you very much, Sally, much appreciated. I'm really looking forward to this conversation. I've known Dilys for quite some time now. Dilys is one of my friends within the sector, well, a friend more generally, but a friend within the sector. And it's always wonderful to be able to have these existential, deep-rooted conversations that we typically have, but just in front of an audience now. So certainly looking forward to it. I have just a few minutes to talk you through the findings of our cost of living report. But by way of very quick introduction, in addition to what I said earlier about us, so I run Do It Now, a racial justice organization focused on the Black community. We're an infrastructure organization within that context, which, as you can imagine, puts us in a very interesting space in the middle of all of the changes that are currently happening in the sector, as infrastructure and racial justice work kind of continue falling on the priority list of the collective mind of the sector. It is our job within the context of the work that we do and the work that our community members do, of which there are about 1,000 now, over 1,000 Black-led charities and social enterprises that we represent and support. My role here is to highlight the information that they shared with us. Now, 93 organizations answered the SNAP survey that we released, and we found, thankfully, that was a solidly representative view of our community, covering different parts of the UK, as well as different organizational sizes, organizational registration, legal structures as well. And I'm not going to spend a lot of time on the kind of demographic aspects of it. Please do look at the actual report to get some more of this, but I did want to highlight a couple of things within this. We are London centric, we're London focused in a lot of our work, and that's naturally because the largest largest demographic split, geographical split of the Black community is in London. So naturally, a lot of the conversations that we have about cost of living, about needs, about supports, about infrastructure will take a London centric view. In that sense. We also advocate for a better understanding of community interest companies within the funding sector, and better support and acceptance of that structure as well, because it is typically and increasingly the type of organization that our community members tend to register in the context of cost of living, despite the fact that community interest companies are non-profits and have asset locks and those limited by guarantee, have all of these stipulations in place and reinvest and all that. Most of community interest companies do not have nearly the level of protection that charities do in terms of taxes, for instance, as well as access to things like, anything that TechSoup provides. So whether that's the $10,000 a month you can get in Google Ads that most charities don't even use, you can't access that as a CIC to begin with. So there are a lot of these cost implications that we expect CICs to be doing the same level of work for the same level of funding. There are actually extra burdens placed on CICs that are seemingly just not factored into the level that we would like to see them factored into. So years in operation, as you can see, most of the organizations are around that 1 to 5 year mark, which is usually where you kind of start seeing that failure rate around the 5-year mark. And that's because most organizations find that they haven't been able to secure diversified funding, have found themselves in a trust and foundation loop, and have never been able to kind of extricate themselves from that, and have found themselves unfortunately unable to find the right support, the right teams, the right resources around them. So that's within the context of racial justice, advocating in the context of cost of living for a lot of capacity building support, because money is important and it's very important, but the money isn't showing up that quickly. And capacity building, resource support, shared back offices, mergers, pro bono consultancy, access to trustees and advisors, those can all show up quicker. So considering support from a holistic perspective is beneficial in the context of supporting organizations at the moment, as funders seem to have shrunk away from the problem, recognizing that it is a very big problem. There are multiple solutions beyond the funding that funders can provide. It's access to connections, introductions, and the like. So I'll now go into the key findings of the report. Well, as you can see, the vast majority in May were very concerned about the cost of living crisis, extremely concerned actually. And I think that we all share that concern. And that has likely increased over the past couple of weeks with some announcements made by the hopeful incoming Labour government. I think most people are hopeful about that. Then we've got here the biggest challenges that the organizations are facing. It's the duality of decreased revenue and increased operating costs puts organizations in a kind of hamster wheel of survival and panic-based decision-making, as they're seeing less money come in and they're seeing the needs of their community continue to rise, but they're also seeing the costs related to that baseline of delivery continue to rise exponentially as well. So one of the things that we recognize in the middle of COVID that we don't seem to recognize in the middle of the cost of living crisis is the level of need for innovation has increased actually rather than decreased. Digitization was an innovation, yes, but cost-based efficiencies are an incredible innovation. They require an entire overhaul of all of your operations in order to find those efficiencies. And organizations are not in the headspace or they have the time to do that work because they're losing staff. They are having to fight fires constantly, and it's becoming untenable, or it is already untenable. And my fear relating to this is, and my fear really relating to all the work that we do with Black-led charities and social enterprises, is that our community represents an extremely disconnected community, disconnected from the mainstream of charities and social enterprises, national campaigns, statutory services. Our charities and social enterprises are the connecting force between much of the work that is happening, whether that's local government. So local government will refer into Black-led charities and social enterprises without providing the much needed financial support to provide for that individual. So we're in a place where we need these organizations to survive, but the level of support and resource as well as funding that is needed is not being provided to them. And the creativity the creativity needed to address those challenges is waning as the energy to firefight wanes as well. Naturally, the thing that you do when you start seeing your money decrease is write more bids. But in the middle of a sector where apparently 70% of funders are in some level of strategic review and have closed some of their funding streams, the level of competition for the funding that we already have, that it has dwindled as funders have chosen to, for good reason, I'm sure, have chosen to reduce the amount of funding in many cases that they're giving in the next year or two as they try to grapple with how they operate in this new system. The level of competition means that they're putting in a lot of work for something that won't turn out in their favor. So I've posed this question: is fundraising a waste of my time right now? Should I be looking to restructure the organization? Should I be reducing staff numbers, leaving vacancies unfilled? Is it worthwhile trying to build the relationships and enter into this discussion around fundraising in a sector that requires my energy to be spent not only on building my organization, but explaining to funders why my sector specific to the Black community needs support? So there is an added emotional burden required of Black-led charities and social enterprises, particularly outside of London, to convince the sector funders of their validity and necessity in the middle of the cost of living crisis as well. I recognize that there isn't an understanding of funding from our side in terms of as a community. We're lived experience leaders. 97% of our community identifies lived experience leaders. So we are people that got frustrated with austerity, likely, got frustrated with the lack of authentic and culturally sensitive support, became fearful in many cases of where the next generation was going, and decided to create solutions. We didn't start off with a job at the National Lottery or any of the other big funders. We don't have the history, the understanding of how decisions are made about strategy on and funding at a philanthropic level. What we have is an understanding of our own organizations, and it's important to recognize that, unfortunately, that isn't matching up on both sides. What we're asking for is grants and loans for the most part. As you can see, 75%. So the most effective way would be grants and loans. While they have received some support, as you'll see on the left side of the screen, they have received some support. It's important to note the kind of percentage of that support. So an organization like ours, yes, we've received COVID support. Sorry, not COVID support, cost of living support in the form of a grant, which would put us in that 30%. But we received one grant, and it represents less than I think about 1.5% of our entire revenue, which obviously in context of how much things have increased in terms of cost, does not bridge the gap. So some support has been received, but the level of that support was not investigated in the context of this work. And as you can see, they're identifying that they would need, the vast majority of them would need about 25 to 75% more money than they had in their previous financial year in order to meet the demand that they're currently seeing.
Deep.
And just to wrap up here, one of the things that has been really kind of disturbing to me is the thought that we could wake up in 6 months from now and see, and this is
I met her at Baby Talk. She's gonna probably come.
Sorry. So one of the things that we've been recognizing is this idea that obviously the fact that so many organizations are in a really difficult cash flow position and in a really difficult financial standing at the moment, and the fact that there isn't that level of support on the flip side to provide the grant base that is needed to support them to firefight and solve emergencies, there also isn't that ability to safeguard the enterprise development work and the things that would help them get out of that cycle in the long term. Because what's happened over the past few years is, as financial standing going into COVID dipped, organizations became less eligible for social investment because their financial standing wouldn't be tenable for it. And we're going back and built a reliance on trust foundations. And we're in this emergency, we're going back into that. And unfortunately, there isn't a thorough line from grants. There's even less of a thorough line from grants into social investment than there was in 2019 as a result of the multiple emergencies that have been faced. So this is where Black-led charities and social enterprises are saying they would like investment, unrestricted funding to cover staff and overheads and rent and capital costs. 16% would like support with social investment preparation, and 22% would like support with enterprise development. It's my belief that to get us out of this position, we need to come alongside and actively partner with Black-led charities and social enterprises so that they can navigate, from a lived experience perspective, the reality that they're facing, which is that you don't know what you don't know. And most of us have never been to business school. We didn't learn how to build these things in a traditional way. We don't have the seniority within our existing employment or former employment experiences to be able to navigate these things well. And I think it would be a damn shame if we insisted, by creating systems and barriers, that you had to be a business degree holder and or a senior person in a corporation before you could build an organization out of your passion and have it succeed. The slide on the left I find quite harrowing, which is, how much do you feel that funders have your best interests in mind in the current cost of living crisis? And if you consider this as an NPS or Net Promoter Score, you'll note that anything below a 4 means that they don't trust you. It's not a case of 3s and above are good. It's anything below a 4 is bad. So really, I mean, I suppose we should be glad at least 12% of the Black community seem to like funders right now and think that funders have their best interests at heart. But the reality is 82% or 88% are not of that mind. And I think that is going to likely see a lot of organizations quietly divesting from engagement in the funding sector and going back to these kind of roundabout methodologies that stifled innovation, but were not quite so emotionally draining. Thank you for your time.
I'd just say thank you for that, Bayo. You know, the research and what it has surfaced. I mean, just to speak from a pathway perspective, I was just thinking about, you know, reflections from your work, and for those who are new to what the Pathway Fund does, as I said earlier, we are the first Black-led social investment wholesaler in this country. And even thinking about that, you know, in 2023, we are very much a newly emergent social investment wholesaler. And to say, you know, the first Black-led, you know, again, speaks to the challenges that Black-led organizations, enterprises, communities are facing right now. In terms of our work at Pathway, you know, we established ourselves at the end of last year, and our focus is very much on creating, providing, unlocking, catalyzing opportunities for Black and ethnic, the minoritized communities. Our focus of our work will be around that enterprise development, because absolutely hear you, Bayo, that all of that work that was done around, enterprise readiness and development, all of those gains, we're starting to lose those. Enterprise development's very important for our communities when we're thinking about community wealth building, which has been an issue of concern of our communities forever, and it's a core concern of ours and priority at Pathway Fund. Also, asset acquisition is important for us, the ability for our communities to own their own assets and to control their assets and to generate wealth from that, so that we have the power and self-determination to really fully thrive, and we're better able to respond to crises like these, compared to our non-Black counterparts. At the heart of our work is all around creating conditions for our communities to solve these social issues. And as I said, we're doing that through our enterprise development work. What I do want to say is that, looking at the figures, I just thought to myself, what did we learn from 2020? 2020, we had COVID-19, and as a sector, we saw, funders come together. We saw an ability of funders to come together, to collaborate, to pool funding, to get that funding out quickly and in a streamlined fashion. We saw the processes come up, be developed for all of those things to happen. For instance, more practically, things around, fix the form or having one pooled fund, and also that ability of funders to work through enterprises or intermediaries. We saw all of these things. And so reading and looking at all of the figures today, we have gone backwards. It's not will we already have gone backwards. I'm thinking about, so for all of that real great work that happened in 2020, there's something about us as a sector, particularly funders, asking, what did we learn as funders? What types of investments did we see work? In terms of the collaboration and the processes, are we building on these? And if so, how are we? And there's that bigger, real emphasis on us learning from what happened in 2020 and building on this, because already, compared to 2020, there's less money out there. There are fewer funds that are invested in Black-led enterprises and charities. There are fewer pooled funds. I mean, preparing myself for even this talk, I was just doing research as to, where are the funds right now? And there are very few, I'll tell you all, if you compare 2020 to today, and so to your point, is fundraising worth it? It's a necessity, for survival. However, you are, and we're working within, I guess, a context right now where there are fewer funds. And so, my call and ask to all funders in the room, and one that us Pathway are also taking into account, grappling with, is more investment. We saw that 2020 COVID-19 pooling of funds and calling it something similar, cost of living, the emergency facing Black communities and Black-led enterprises, and to have something like today, right now. Also thinking about, what can funders be doing, that response. And we talked about, as a sector, trust, building that trust. And so think about, that trust-based approach. There is need here in this country, in this context, for funders to really come together to look at that trust-based approach, to build a collective approach together, and also need for us to work alongside communities. It's that inclusion piece, the inclusion coming right at the beginning, from when we realize, for instance, cost of living. We know it's a crisis. We know that Black communities are going to face the bigger brunt of it in terms of the amount of income that's coming into the household, in terms of more reliance on social services, higher demand for those services, and a higher cost of delivering those services. And there's an opportunity for funders right now to come together and to bring organisations such as do it now. Another great intermediaries into the room to identify the problem as well as the solution. Sometimes the challenge and what funders could do better on is in bringing organisations in right at the beginning. Not necessarily once the programme has been designed and we very much looking for someone to work with, but really right at the beginning. And this is a major, well, I guess it is a critique really, because we need to do better. We need to also start the work from the problem, as opposed to thinking about what the size of the pot is and what the potential solutions are. And that's where that collaboration with the communities is so important. Without that collaboration at the beginning is where we are easily losing trust. Trust isn't established, and often you find out the wrong problem therefore is being addressed. From your report, and it's nothing new in terms of what we keep on hearing, is around unrestricted funding. That need for non-programmatic funding, no restrictions on that, so that Black-led organisations are better able to determine where their growth is needed. Something that funders could be working on is that consistency around what is deemed unrestricted funding. Because what is happening is, programmatic funding is being called unrestricted. The concept of what unrestricted is and why it was needed is started to change and has drifted completely. So I'd say, there's a big emphasis on that consistency, uniformity in that. I think there's also a great need to invest in the intermediary ecosystem. I think by your report, surfaced that really eloquently in terms, in the conclusion around how funders and the sector could be working alongside and through intermediaries much more. We started to see some of that happen in COVID-19, where a lot of investment, to deploy grants was made to intermediaries. What I would say, the challenge of that model was that it didn't necessarily account for the work that intermediaries do to deliver those funds. It was almost at a shortfall to those intermediaries. And there was also something around, how are we as a funding community building those intermediaries? Because the intermediaries such as the Do It Now, or Bayo, Voice for Change, raft of them are the capacity builders. And as funders, a lot of investment has gone into setting up, for instance, a capacity building fund or tagging it on. My view would be we really should be investing that capital, that lens into those ecosystem builders, those BM-led intermediaries to do that work. And also, around, incentivization. We hear this a lot, incentivized grants. I'd really like to see that go alongside the real costs of delivering the service. So, the incentivization not being going under and into the cost of delivering, but those are two very separate things. Really would like us as funders to recognise that. I think there's space also for funders to be more open about their operations and more visibility around the workings of the operations. And I say this because this is where the trust is formed and built. And this is where, funders could be working and displaying working in partnership with organisations. And for instance, what that could look like is, a foundation saying, we're really grappling with the issue of how we build a pipeline. For instance, how we build a pipeline of, say, young Black entrepreneurs. And just taking that issue, that challenge, and going directly to an intermediary to explain that's the problem. Now, the next piece is, okay, how do we both work together to try and tackle that problem? And, working in that way, you would get a complete different solution and a complete different way of investing, as well as a complete different product. Because we hear in the sector much so about the challenge of building the pipeline. And I think it's about looking at the issue completely differently and working alongside those communities to identify that problem. Also want to say, COVID-19, what we still see a bit of is around short-term small grants. What COVID-19 and today we didn't learn from is that piece around to build resilience. Resilience means longer-term planning, a longer-term commitment and an intention behind that, and that intention being backed up by longer-term funding and larger funds. And these are all things that, in terms of that question around, what funders could be doing to mitigate the impact of this crisis, and all of these things. And it's not just for, this cost of living crisis. Putting these things into place will mean that we are building better, and we're not, coming back in 3 years' time, having that similar conversation about the shrinking of funds in this space. We will also have much more stronger intermediaries, and much more of them. And yes, it's just more about thinking about progression. I think there's also something around, funders working with teams who have lived experience at the outcomes focus area, but also really at the beginning. We're starting to look at what allocations look like. There's something about funders looking at ourselves, our own practices, and asking, okay, are we inclusive? Because we do work with organisations, there's an expectation around, diversity, inclusion and equity, which we always ask. But there's something about us asking ourselves, are we reflective of what we're asking around that? And in terms of that, looking at, more representation within the organisation into leadership roles, decision-making roles like that. And we know that a crisis in the sector has been lack of representation. And if I was looking at the funder component of the sector, we know that representation is a huge issue. And so it's almost, if you don't have the representation, then we won't really address the problem, and we'll just keep on going around in. Bayo talks about the hamster wheel, and so that the sector will continue going around in that hamster wheel. I would also say that funders and Black-led intermediary grant makers, there's something about more rapid distribution of funds. The time it takes as a sector to deploy, usually by that time we're in high crisis, and that's even before the money has gone into the bank account. There's something about us really being able to act at pace. And in order to do that, to Bayo's point, that is where the collaboration will come in. Now, I guess what I read from your report was around, or what came out was the ability of funders to meet organisations where they are. To really match and ask ourselves, this fund or this investment we want to make, does that meet the organisation where they are? Does it meet the sector and the communities where they are? And if it doesn't do that, well, that's the opportunity to go to those organisations and to look at, okay, what changes do we need to make so that this investment gathers or garners that impact? And if we're not asking those questions as funders, then we are doing our communities a huge disservice, and unlikely also to meet that social impact that we're there to achieve. I had a question really for Bayo, because you talked about the approaches that you had seen. Well, you talked about strengths-based approach, which is a brilliant approach. It's an approach I've used in the past. It does meet organisations where they are and also where they want to go. Also moves away from the deficit model. You know, it looks at what you can do as opposed to what you don't have. Also enables us to move away from that risk focus and that focus of what is a risk. And so, yeah, on that tack, wanted to ask you, Bayo, in terms of the approaches that you have seen funders and investors do, what does work and what is working?
I mean, I think the evidence speaks in this direction, so I'm not being biased in with only our work in mind. I completely agree with you, Dilys. What I've seen work badly is a complete top-down approach. It fails every single time when you are approaching communities that start from a position of distrust or mistrust in the system, start from a position of lack of understanding, lack of engagement, and just an incredible amount of opacity on the other side that means that we're constantly on the back foot. I always like to include my story in this of starting Do It Now. Now, for 3 years, Do It Now was registered as a limited by shares company. And I did that because when I was registering it, that's what everyone I knew that was running a business said you should register your company as. And I'd been applying for grants, did not know that was why I was being rejected with no feedback every single time for 3 years. And in that time, I think I spent my own money to the tune of, like, on average, 14 to 15,000 pounds a year of my own savings, salary sacrifice, and loans and credit cards in order to build Do It Now. And it all got solved because I happened to be in a conference one day and overheard someone saying, you won't get funded that way. You have to be a CIC by guarantee at the very least. And that single moment changed the trajectory of our organization to get us to the point where we are today. That I liken that experience to people trying to engage in the current system. You say it's in the guidance documents, it's on the website. But even if you read it, I genuinely think understanding is a gift and a miracle. Reading something and actually understanding how it affects you, your organization, and knowing what to change and how to change is incredibly difficult. But we constantly ask organizations led by people who have no background in this whatsoever to meet us at that level. So what an intermediary does, and I learned the most incredible statistic yesterday. Intermediaries, apparently for the most part, are the only funders into the organizations that they fund, which is incredible, because we kind of think about this thing about this melding of funding going in all these different directions and all interconnected. But when you're working with an intermediary, you're reaching, by design, organizations that would have never made it into the existing fortified system that is made for the wonderful individuals that probably worked in a charity for 3 years, then did some kind of, I don't know, on purpose or something like that, and then decided that they were going to start something and started it, and it's doing wonderfully for them and their community, and that's great. But what happens to all the other people who were like me, who got into mountains of debt, honestly, trying to build something that I still very much believe in, and thankfully is able to pay me. But I think we build systems so often not really thinking about how difficult it is for the person right at the end of the barrier of the circle of this system that we are all in, that is trying to make it to these resources, and the difficulty that they have to overcome at each and every single hurdle to finally make it there. And I think, honestly, that is why, and I know I'm going around the houses a little bit, but I think that is why people are so emotional about their organizations because they tie it to the barriers that they had to overcome to get to where they are, but then so emotional about the rejections as well, because it feels like when you get an automatic rejection, or you get no support with your application, or you have this group of people that feel very disconnected from you, that just by as a form of self-protection, you don't even try to put yourself up for that funding. It feels like you're just being kicked back out to the edge of the circle every single time when you did all of that work to get to the middle. So for me, at the very least, we need to ensure that we're working with community organizations when we're designing these funds, that we interrogate it completely, that we're empowering organizations that we bring to the table to say that doesn't work. And we actually change things when they say that doesn't work. And we listen to them and we resource them to host their own information sessions that don't need the big funder to be in them. So it can be a space where people feel really comfortable to ask the questions that they don't, like, imagine not being able to ask a question because you're worried that the funder in the room will remember the name of your organization and be like, oh, that was a dumb question. I have been through that exact same thing. That thing of just being like, that one question is going to be the reason they never give us funding ever because they think I'm dumb. We're all people at the end of the day. So we need a lot more help than you may think we do to get to where we would all like us to be.
Thank you. And I'm conscious that there are questions and hands up. And I just want to say thank you, Bayo, because previously similar work that we had done together before was looking at how we invest in Black-led organisations and young people. And the approach that I and Bayo, we've both spoken of, we took this approach and used that approach to design a fund, based on all of the research and evidence. And the long and short of it was, of all of the organisations that even came through, call it a pipeline, all the organisations that came through for funding, 86% had never applied for funding from a large funder, were not even on the radar of that funder at all. And it was just by taking all of these approaches, we got a complete different program. What we also found was that pre-support was so important. I keep talking about meeting organisations where they are. What it really means is, understanding the organisations and the communities that we're talking about, the issues that they're facing, and designing, working with communities to build a program around that, but not just the program, the legacy piece. What's next after that? What big difference will this investment make to the communities, but also the organisations that are supporting them?
Sorry, Patricia, you know how much I love and respect you. 1 second, I have one question and then we'll come to you, please, and thank you. When Pathway was announced and all of this work started bubbling and this vision started coming to life, there are moments in time that you kind of feel like, oh wow, they actually see me. The things that you've been talking about you didn't think would ever actually happen. Suddenly there was an announcement and it feels like a siren or signal that something is changing. And Pathway is that moment. And I wanted to know, and Dilys, what has been your experience of trying to educate the sector on the importance of this moment that is, and I don't mean moment as transitory, I mean moment as a stake in the ground, that we can all hopefully in 3 or 4 years' time look back and say, yep, that was a beginning of something that built out into change across the sector. Are you finding that people are gravitating towards Pathway on that behest, or are you finding people are resisting to some extent? I know where I think people are.
Overall, in terms of the mandate of Pathway, why we're are here what we aim to do. Yes, and we found people receptive to it, understanding the problem, because you can't deny the facts and the figures. Right? That next piece about is there a readiness to do what it takes to invest around racial equity? I would say that is the challenge there, and because we're also seeing a slight different political context, shift really in terms of politics right now, and so that is a barrier, and I would say challenge for us at Pathway. How we realise that ambition with that racial equity mandate and be true to ourselves and stay on our mission.
I mean, that's the age-old problem, isn't it? Knowing what has to be done, but also having to work through the slow moves of the sector and the processes. Because no one is, my favorite and least favorite part of the sector is no one thinks they're a bad person. No one wants to be a bad person. We just all have to work through these systems that we don't know how to change, even if we really, really want to, and we're all trying so hard. But at the end of the day, we need to figure out how to shift quickly, because some of these conversations have been a decade long or more.